That day I asked him, "Shan Mao, do you dislike me?" He remained silent for a long time before saying, "I don't dislike you, but I don't like you either." The bond between us, half of it was my own wishful thinking, and half of it was his endless tolerance. As I traveled through the provincial capital on a business trip, a fine autumn drizzle floated over the platform outside the high-speed rail station. Across the tracks, an old green train similar to the one I used to take in my college days sat parked, reminiscent of those cramped and crowded journeys. Just the thought of it brought back the cacophony of voices and smells that filled the carriage. For some reason, a strange certainty emerged in my mind. This was the K34 train. Beep, beep. The high-speed train slowly started moving, its orange lights passing by, briefly illuminating a familiar silhouette in one of the windows. I stood frozen in place, gripping the door handle in disbelief, unable to tear my eyes away from that familiar face. Complaints arose from the carriage, and it wasn't until the train attendant stopped my frantic attempt to reach the next carriage that I snapped out of my reverie. All sound faded away, the scene plunged into darkness, and it felt as if I stood at the mouth of a tunnel of time, watching the silent face of Shan Mao reflected in the window of the K34 train. Tears streamed down my face. When Shan Mao first saw me, I was sitting astride my deskmate, Meng Yuan, with my hair disheveled. The desks and chairs were strewn about, and the surrounding students were making a ruckus. According to Shan Mao, at that moment, my face was as red as a tomato, tears and snot streaming down, and I was fiercely grabbing onto the boy who couldn't stop screaming, resembling a madwoman. This startled him. The teacher who took me in, Old Su, was the math teacher for both our classes and also Shan Mo's homeroom teacher. He had intended to send a message to me, but he ended up waiting until Meng Yuan's lackeys were about to beat me up before he intervened. Teachers here. It was like a bolt from the blue. Everyone scattered. It was at this moment that Shan Mo walked up beside me. He hesitated for a moment before tapping on my desk. "Sudi, Teacher Su wants you to wait for her in her office at lunchtime." When I looked up, I was struck by his face. It might have been the most handsome face I had ever seen in real life. Even now, 10 years later, thinking of him, I still feel his gaze flowing through my heart like a clear stream. Ding, ding. I impatiently honked the horn. Everything was going wrong. I had just returned to Nanjing and got stuck in traffic. A truck ahead had an accident, and several pigs escaped through a gap in the fence and were running wild on the highway. After the commotion settled, I was filled with exhaustion. Since Teacher Su passed away, I rarely came back except for tomb sweeping. Every tree and blade of grass here would evoke memories of my past. But when I checked all the schedules for that time period, I didn't guess wrong. It was indeed the K34 train. As if guided by some mysterious force, I felt compelled to come back, to find him, Shan Mao. He was my last concern in Nanjing, even though he had repeatedly pushed me away. The car in front suddenly braked, and my hood slammed into its rear lights. Furious, I honked the horn aggressively and got out of the car. Soon, the owner of the car in front also got out. His hair was cut very short, his skin was brownish, and his bulging biceps almost stretched his shirt without a single wrinkle. Under the sunglasses, half of his face displayed extremely stern lines, giving the impression of someone not easily reasoned with. So, when he got out of the car, inspected the dent, and walked up to me with his arms crossed, I quietly twisted open the self-defense ring. "Sudi?" He called out my name tentatively, without making a move. I was puzzled. Who was he? Then he took off his glasses, revealing a pair of eyes I disliked, bright, arrogant, and always seeming displeased. He quickly glanced at my hand behind me and then burst into laughter. That cold face instantly became lively and vibrant, trembling with laughter, and his dimples sank deep into his cheeks. "I didn't expect you hadn't changed at all." Listening to the tone of his voice, which seemed to be mocking or teasing, I really didn't want to twist the ring back. "Meng Yuan, long time no see." The smile on his face lingered for a long time, and his grip was so strong it hurt. I suspected he was deliberately retaliating against me, but I would never show pain in front of Meng Yuan. Habit is a terrible thing. It was like this over a decade ago, and it's still the same now. My car needed some time to be repaired, so sitting on the bus, I felt like a stranger in this unfamiliar place. Nanchang had changed a lot. The streets built in the 80s and 92nd had been almost completely demolished and rebuilt. The familiar, warm-hearted atmosphere had disappeared along with everything else. This place seemed like it had never belonged to me. After losing Teacher Su, my relatives were no longer my relatives. How could this place still be considered my hometown? The bus had arrived near the old vegetable market. Without thinking, I blurted out to the driver, "Stop at the old market." But the bus didn't stop. The driver's voice came faintly from the front. "This stop has been cancelled." I was stunned. Time had eradicated everything. First, the vegetable market became the name of a bus stop, and then even that name disappeared from public transportation. Walking back to the vicinity of the old market, a dense drizzle began to fall. The first time I saw Shanmao was actually at this old vegetable market. It used to be filled with stalls set up by farmers, offering a variety of fruits and vegetables. Walking further in, you could smell a strong fishy odor. In front of the fish stall, there were long plastic basins with transparent pipes inserted into them, bubbling with bubbles. The slate floor was wet and sticky, and the large fish in the basin would occasionally splash water, wetting the trousers of passers-by. You had to be extremely careful when passing by. At that time, I was probably only 5 or 6 years old, and Shenmo's tofu stall was in the middle of the vegetable and fresh meat areas. His parents were simple and reticent people, with fair faces but many signs of life's hardships. When his mother handed over a piece of tofu, I could clearly see the calluses on her right hands. The market was full of temptation for me at the time. The steaming tofu emitted wet steam, and my gaze was drawn to the chaotic scene in the midst. I didn't even notice when Teacher Su left. Adults always like to tease children, and they never tired of it. Only the delicate boy at the tofu stall woke me up. "Hey, your grandma's gone." I snapped out of it, and the adults around buying pork looked at me with amused eyes. With the panic of being abandoned, I hurried to catch up and then fell in front of the red plastic basin. That day's encounter ended in embarrassment. I left the market crying, with the tofu-selling boy's handkerchief wrapped around my knee. His name was embroidered on that handkerchief, Shan Mao. Ding, ding. The horn behind me honked, and I took a few steps under the shade of the trees. A raindrop suddenly fell on my hair, cool and startling. The person in the car slowly rolled down the window, and the overcast sky made his features even more profound. He waved the cigarette in his hand at me. "Sudi, come up." Damn it, the persistent Meng Yuan again. As the rain intensified, he flicked the cigarette butt off the car window and dispersed the smoke inside the car, urging me to get on. I ignored him, but his horn kept blaring. In the end, I compromised. "By the way, Sudi, what brings you back here out of the blue?" The neon lights flashed along the roadside, and amidst the bustle in traffic, Meng Yuan glanced back at me through the gap in the traffic. "Just came back for a casual stroll," I replied. I didn't feel like telling him the truth, especially since back in school, he always had a grudge against Shan Mao. "Have you heard? Nanzhao is about to be demolished," he said, always trying to provoke some reaction from me. This time, he succeeded. I rolled my eyes at him, and he laughed even louder. "What's so funny? You haven't changed at all," I retorted. During the red light, Meng Yuan turned his head to look at me carefully. Then he spoke seriously. "Maybe you should get to know me again, and I can get to know you again too." "Welcome back, Sudi." I fell silent. Meng Yuan's sudden appearance caught me off guard, but his presence gradually pulled me back to Nanchang. In the past, I did live in this rainy autumn town. I did like a boy named Shan Mao, and my dream of love was just a step away. The car stopped in front of the Liching Hotel, its blinking orange-red taillights resembling the tail of a comet. It was then that I noticed it was a modest, understated old Buick, not at all matching the ostentatious style of its owner. Not to mention that Meng Yuan had already upgraded to the Audi that everyone envied over a decade ago. Meng Yuan leaned out of the driver's seat, sounding confident. "Hey, Siri, how about we go to Nanzhao together tomorrow? But you said it's going to be demolished. How are we going in?" I couldn't help but retort as I looked at his handsome profile. "Don't worry, I have a way," he replied confidently, flashing me a confident smile through the rain curtain, revealing a row of dazzling white teeth. Well, his method turned out to be this. Watching Meng Yuan casually scaling the fence as if no one was around, I nervously glanced around, afraid that someone might come and embarrass both of us. Meng Yuan's movements were exceptionally agile. He quickly landed from the fence, then began to urge me on. Carefully climbing the somewhat shaky fence, I couldn't help but curse him under my breath. "Meng Yuan, I shouldn't have trusted you. You're such an idiot. After 10 years, you've become so timid." His tone carried that familiar provocation, which I couldn't stand. Gritting my teeth, I lifted up my skirt and climbed a little higher. Meng Yuan immediately turned his head away, saying, "Hey, can you be a bit more ladylike?" I jumped down fiercely, brushing off the rust and dust from my hands. "Why do you always have to say everything?" Leading the way ahead, Meng Yuan laughed even louder at my words. The old site of Nanjing Elementary School exuded a dusty atmosphere, like old photos falling out of an opened album. The white walls were eroded and spotted with yellow. The red slogans and childish graffiti had faded, and the abandoned teaching building was covered with vines. Returning after so many years, I couldn't help but feel how small everything was here. Climbing the stairs, dust trembled and fell, all the way up to the old classroom on the 3rd floor. My gaze stopped at the chipped red wooden door. During many class breaks, I could see Shanmo passing through here, but that was no coincidence. Later, Shanmo told me that his mother was weak and had to take medicine all year round, unable to do heavy work. The little money from selling tofu was barely enough, and even the school fees became a difficult expense. It was Teacher Su who helped him waive these fees. Since seeing me fight, he wanted to look out for me in Teacher Su's absence, which was a way to repay Teacher Su's kindness. He would pass through the corridor during the short break, bask in the sun, and quietly observe if anyone bullied me, silently providing information. Because of me, many boys later came to dislike Shanmo. Meng Yuan was just one of them. Lost in thought, I stared at that door. I had forgotten where I used to sit, but only this door still conveyed Shanmo's caring yet silent gaze through the wind and frost. The classroom was empty, the bare cement floor held no nostalgia, and I didn't know when Meng Yuan had entered. "Siri, I'm sorry," he said suddenly, and before I could respond, he continued, "I was wrong before. Everyone pampered me and indulged me, but you ignored me. You were always engrossed in those tattered books, and whenever I showed off, you would give me that dumb look. At that time, it really made me mad." Meng Yuan kept rubbing his toe against the ground, his back to me, his head low, as if lost in some memory. Later, when your biological parents came looking for you, it spread throughout the office, and even Mrs. Su knew about it. I was annoyed with you at the time. Zhu Hao secretly told me about it, and I casually mentioned it. Who knew you would hit me? You usually seemed so calm, but then you fought like a madman, and you even bit my forehead. He lifted his hair, revealing a shallow mark on his forehead. Thinking about it now, I deserved it. You did deserve it. Indeed, just thinking about it made me angry. This was my biggest sore spot. More than 20 years ago, my biological parents sold me. Later, the couple who took me in had their own child and no longer wanted me. At that time, Teacher Su had just gotten divorced and took pity on me, so she took me in. From a young age, she only allowed me to call her Teacher Su, but to others, I still called her grandmother. Our family was different from others, and in those days, that made us stand out. Even though I didn't want people to know about this difference at the time, let alone being rejected by the crowd. But Meng Yuan somehow found out, and he shouted in front of everyone, "You're adopted, Your parents don't want you." Then his brand new sneakers and high-end brand clothes were pressed into the ground by me, covered in dust. In that moment, the beast inside me couldn't be controlled anymore. I wanted to beat him to death, until his friends intervened. Until Shenmo appeared next to that warm red wooden door and put a stop to the commotion. Now thinking back, I wish I could have beaten you to death. Facing my cold gaze, he approached, and I finally saw the shame and struggle on his face, but that wasn't enough to quell my anger. His voice was unusually stiff. "How about you hit me again?" My hand clenched tightly by my side, and I just glared at him. "Mengyuan, I am a law-abiding citizen. We're not kids anymore, and do you really think I would forgive you for this?" With that, I walked out coldly. Before graduating from elementary school, those rumors never stopped haunting me. It all stemmed from Mengyuan's ridiculous pride. And it wasn't just because of this incident that I disliked him. Is it because of Shenmo? Because of him? Mengyuan's voice came from behind, filled with suppressed anger and complexity, and I didn't understand why. But when I heard Shenmo's name, my heart suddenly felt cold and hot, ultimately returning to Shenmo. I wouldn't accept Mengyuan's self-indulgent apology ceremony. And he owed far more than just me. That day passed, and Mengyuan didn't show up again. Perhaps my words had wounded his great pride once again. Or maybe he was really busy. But it's none of my business. That's just how I am. Teacher Su was right. I'm like a stone in the latrine, stinky and hard. The rain had been falling for almost a week. The sky was perpetually gray as I opened my black umbrella and retraced the path we used to take to middle school. I watched the amethyst flowers wilt in the mud underfoot, trampled by footsteps. The cold fragrance lingered around me until I returned to the hotel. Only then did I notice a few lonely yellow petals hanging behind my coarse wool coat. In an instant, I remembered the thermos Shenmo handed me, filled with white sugar, amethyst, and tofu pudding. Amethyst sauce sweet tofu pudding might not be a big deal now, but at that time, it sold very well. The idea actually came from me. That year, amethyst blossomed particularly well in the Shen family. On Friday afternoon, as we walked home from school, Shenmo suddenly asked if I wanted to go to his house to pick amethyst flowers, and we agreed to meet again on Saturday. On a cool autumn afternoon, you could smell the fragrance from the alley. Ed Shen sat on a stool by the door, pouring a large bag of dried beans into a stainless steel basin, bending over to constantly stir and wash them by hand. The weather had already started to cool down, and when she greeted me, I noticed her hands were red from soaking. "Auntie, where's Shenmo?" She forced a smile and pointed her wet fingers towards the back of the house. "Shenmo is at the back." I nodded and hurried to the back, pretending not to see the tears still wet on her face. I didn't know what had happened in the Shen family, as it was rare to not see Uncle Shen in broad daylight. Passing through the hall, I caught a whiff of alcohol, and the sound of stacking firewood came from behind the back door. Peeking in, I saw Shenmo standing on top, wearing old overalls, pulling tarpaulin overhead. Underneath were several bundles of firewood. "Shenmo!" Just a moment, almost done. He glanced at me, answering warmly, his hands moving even faster. Soon, he finished pulling the tarpaulin and securing it with a rope, then swiftly slid down the wall, light as a crane. "Hold on a sec." The tied firewood was moved to the stove, and he went to wash his hands at the sink. His beautiful hands were covered in mud, even his fair face, yet he still looked composed, with bits of wood chips in his hair. But he didn't appear disheveled at all. "All set, let's go." But I stood on tiptoe and gently wiped the dirt off his face with my cold fingers. Shenmo suddenly jumped as if startled, his ears turning red. "What are you doing?" Seeing his reaction, I burst into laughter, just wiping it off. He quickly wiped his face. At that moment, there was movement inside the house, and Uncle Shen lifted the plastic curtain and walked out, his eyes still red. "Susu's here, huh?" He seemed a bit embarrassed, and Shenmo quickly changed the subject. "Dad, I brought in the firewood we'll use tomorrow. Where's the plastic sheet at home? Sudi and I are going to pick amethyst flowers." Uncle Shen quickly rode his donkey downhill, fetched the plastic sheet, spread it under the osmanthus tree, and gave us some instructions before leaving. Shen Mo and I each took a stick and began tapping the flower branches. The golden osmanthus rain carried a strong fragrance, drenching us, and soon the plastic sheet was covered in a layer of flowers. We quietly collected the osmanthus flowers. The conversation between Shen's parents in front of the house was barely audible. Even though they deliberately lowered their voices, Shen Mo and I still heard it. It's all because I'm useless and can't earn money. I can only make tofu. Xiao Mo's school miscellaneous fees for next semester are not enough. I've burdened the child. The man's tongue was a bit thick with alcohol, and his voice unintentionally became a bit louder, quickly cut off by his wife. Why say such things? Speak softly. Susu is still here. Don't let her hear. The atmosphere was a bit awkward for a moment, and only the sound of the wind blowing through the treetops could be heard. Shen Mo and I pretended to be busy picking osmanthus flowers, but I could still feel his melancholy, even though he didn't say a word. When the osmanthus flowers were gathered, Shen Mo's hand accidentally hit mine. I bit my lip and glanced at him carefully. Sure enough, his clear black and white eyes looked a bit dim, his eyelashes quietly drooping, but his face was calm, as if he was accustomed to enduring and accepting those words. After some thought, I still said it out loud. Shen Mo, have you ever thought about selling tofu pudding at the morning market? These osmanthus flowers can be made into sauce. I think business would be good in the morning. Shen Mo pondered for a moment, his gaze gradually becoming serious. He nodded after looking at the osmanthus flowers in his hand. Got it, I'll seriously consider it. We picked quite a few osmanthus flowers, and I gave Shen Mo half of them. Use these for an experiment. It was my idea, so consider it helping me test it out. His voice was low. Okay. Sure enough, as always, he readily agreed. Actually, I didn't take it too seriously. People in Nanjing actually didn't have the habit of eating tofu pudding, and the Shen family would have to spend a lot of effort just because of a word from me. However, on Monday morning, I saw the newly added stainless steel bucket in front of the Shen family's cart. They were selling exactly what I had mentioned, osmanthus sauce sweet tofu pudding. People woke up early in the damp and cold autumn mornings, feeling a bit hungry after buying groceries. They couldn't resist a steaming bowl of hot tofu pudding, especially with sweet osmanthus sauce added. The Shen family's business slowly began to flourish. Shen Mo would bring me a pot of tofu pudding every day, refusing to accept payment. When Lao Su found out, she went directly to their house, insisting that they must accept breakfast money, otherwise she wouldn't take anything from their family again. These favors piled up, and Shen Mo felt unable to repay them. Apart from helping me apply for scholarships, Lao Su also gave him extra money for tutoring me. Yes, Shen Mo's science grades were excellent, while I was naturally lacking in some areas. Lao Su would often lose her appetite because of my stubbornness. Only he had such patience, sitting at the dinner table, patiently repeating things over and over until I truly understood the problems. Lao Su arranged things well, but the only oversight was that we were no longer children. Teenage boys and girls spending so much time together would inevitably lead to some problems. In fact, our close relationship was already wildly speculated among our classmates, with everyone guessing if we were in a relationship. Even the class teacher called Lao Su for a conversation. But Lao Su said, our families have known each other for a long time. Shen Mo and Sudi are like siblings. Besides, I'm here overseeing them. This statement left the class teacher speechless. That night, we were in the study as usual, doing our homework. Shen Mo helped me correct my assignments. The events of the day had left my mind in disarray, and I found myself unintentionally staring at him in a daze. Shen Mo was exceptionally handsome, his skin as fair as snow, resistant to any hint of tanning. His eyes had a slightly upturned shape, with narrow and deep creases in his double eyelids. His pupils were a clean and pure black, exuding a captivating charm when he looked at someone. Yet his gaze was clear and serene, seemingly free from any worldly distractions. But I was not. I couldn't help but look at him, especially when he was earnestly correcting homework. The shadows cast by his lowered eyelashes were excessively beautiful, and the contours of his nose resembled the peaks and valleys of a finely drawn landscape. Countless girls would secretly come to see him, and many would even write him love letters. His popularity made me jealous. But he passed through like a breeze, ultimately returning to my desk, furrowing his brows under the lamplight as he explained math problems to me, enduring my intense gaze. Finally, a faint blush appeared on his fair ears and cheeks. He put down his pen and looked at me, unable to bear it any longer. "Sudi, do you still want me to help you with the problems?" I'm sorry. I apologized with deep shame. "I do want to listen to you seriously, but I can't help but be distracted by your face." He blushed and tightened the test paper in his hand, taking a deep breath as if trying to suppress the anger in his heart. The next day, Shanmo wore glasses to school. It seemed like he thought this would make him look a bit less attractive, unaware that good-looking people still looked good even in a sackcloth. The joy of junior high school days was like a fleeting dream. Thanks to him helping me with exam predictions before the high school entrance exam, both he and I got into Yuzhong Nanjing's best high school. The Shen family rarely held a celebration for our advancement, inviting me and Lao Su. Their house was located in an old alley on the west side of the city, where they lived in low, flat-roofed houses. On that evening, after hastily finishing our meal, Shen Mao and I climbed onto the roof with fireworks already prepared. I was too nervous to use the lighter, my hands trembling as I failed to ignite the fuse. Eventually, Shen Mao held my hand, pressing down on my thumb to complete the ignition. Bing! Bing! The fireworks soared into the sky like stars, gently ascending before exploding violently, briefly illuminating the entire night sky above us. In the glow of the flames, Shen Mao, who was usually gentle and reserved, smiled freely. A faint, relaxed curve appeared on his fair face, as if he had temporarily shed some kind of restraint. His brows relaxed as he stood on the edge of the roof, embracing the shape of the wind with a sense of freedom. The sparks were swallowed by the darkness, leaving only the residual scent of gunpowder lingering in the air. The leaves of the osmanthus tree behind the house rustled in the evening breeze, carrying the smell of smoke. Watching Shenmo's back, my heart fluttered. "Sudi, come here." He turned around and quietly beckoned to me, pulling something out of the pocket of his black jacket. I took it and saw that it was a small box of sparklers, something I had only played with when I was much younger. He kindly let me hold the end with the wire and helped me light it. The orange glow of the sparkler, like a shining ball of light in the darkness, flickered gently, warmly illuminating both of our faces. I couldn't help but look at Shen Mao, his eyes slightly excited tonight. I gazed into his eyes, the light reflecting within them, and spoke softly, "Thank you, Shen Mao. Without you, I probably wouldn't have been able to get into Yizhang." He seemed pleased, and after a moment, his voice drifted over gently, "It's nothing." I didn't like his tone of repaying kindness like a claim, feeling a bit displeased as I responded, "Hey, tit for tat. We're fans." "Of course, I have to thank you." I took out a slightly old blue handkerchief from my pocket and handed it to him, saying, "And this, thank you for the handkerchief." His eyes seemed puzzled for a moment, then lingered on my face for a long time, as if recognizing something. From that day on, I felt that Shen Mo had opened up to me, and he spoke more than before. We spent the entire summer vacation hanging out together, going to bookstores and the county cinema. Then, we unexpectedly ran into Men Yuan, who had grown tall and didn't quite look like a teenager anymore. His scrutinizing gaze was still annoying. Men Yuan immediately recognized me, his eyes surprised as I walked over. He was probably surprised by how much a girl could change in just a few months. Yes, I had grown taller this summer, and even woke up one morning with double eyelids. Lao Su even took me shopping for a teenage bra. "Sudi?" My cold and disdainful expression only confirmed his suspicion. Seeing that he was about to say something, I quickly pulled Shanmo away. Shanmo's arm twitched in my embrace, but he eventually let me lead him outside, leaving the annoying ghost's voice clamoring behind us. Hey, Sudi, which high school did you get into? Hey! I was so fed up. I wished I had never met Meng Yuan, both then and now. Braving the rain, I went to Yizhong. The teaching building was lit up in the night, and after some questioning, the guard finally let me in. After entering high school, Shanmo and I both chose to board, and only on Friday nights would we take the bus together. We didn't end up in the same class. Shanmo was actually in the same class and even the same dormitory as Meng Yuan next door. In hindsight, I regretted it a bit. At that time, the heavy academic pressure and Lao Su's health condition kept me preoccupied, and I didn't pay much attention to Shanmo. Instead, I wasted a lot of energy dealing with Meng Yuan. Meng Yuan had paid his way into the school. Knowing that I was also at Yizhong, he kept asking Shanmo to pass me notes and bring me food. I refused several times, but eventually, I couldn't help but get angry at Shanmo. You know I hate him, so why do you keep passing things on for him? At that moment, I couldn't quite articulate what I was angry at Shanmo for, but he lowered his gaze and silently left. After that, he never passed anything on for Meng Yuan again. Without Shanmo's help, Meng Yuan started coming directly to me during breaks and often sat next to me during meals. The girls in the class were envious. After all, Meng Yuan was quite eye-catching with his youthful vigor. But his eager gaze felt ironic to me. Had he forgotten what he had done to me? How dare he appear around me so boldly? My attitude towards him was always cold, which infuriated him. After the midterm exam, on a Friday, I was cornered in a secluded spot in the flower bed between the teaching buildings. The leader of the group was probably from the sports team, and his threatening gestures were quite intimidating. They were saying things like, if you don't give face, don't blame us for being rude, which was extremely unpleasant. But I wasn't giving them any face. This angered the group, especially the leader who seemed intent on hitting me. I didn't know how long Shanmo had been listening nearby, but when the punches came, his slender body stood in front of me, taking several blows for me. His delicate cheeks were suddenly bruised, the wounds on his fair skin particularly striking. My eyes reddened, and like a madwoman, I tried to push Shanmo away. It took all of Shanmo's strength to hold me back, holding me tightly in his arms as he tried to calm me down. Sudi, calm down. We can't beat this group of people. Get away, Shanmo. Who do you think you are? Dare to interfere in Manji's business? Believe me, I'll beat you up. The boys continued to taunt, reaching out to grab and pull me. I didn't notice, and ended up falling to the ground with Shanmo, feeling a sharp pain in my ankle. Shanmo was pinned beneath me, letting out a suppressed groan of pain. When I saw the bruises on his exposed skin, my heart sank. I suddenly realized why Shanmo hadn't been looking for me recently. He had been bullied badly by those people. It was only then that Meng Yuan appeared, taking a long time to stop the group. I was too busy looking after Shanmo to hear his explanation. What was this? A knight in shining armor? I hated him for it, not listening to him and relying on Shanmo's shoulder as I limped away. It was only on the way that I learned from Shanmo how much he had suffered because of me. Even if Meng Yuan didn't act himself, his followers would have helped him. And since they were in the same dormitory, Shanmo couldn't resist the bullying. Tears streamed down my face, and Shanmo gently wiped them away with a handkerchief, jokingly saying, "Don't cry, Sudi. You don't look good when you cry." I gritted my teeth and glared at him, too afraid to hit him, so I dragged my injured foot slowly towards the infirmary, saying to him, "I'm going to find our homeroom teacher. I can't just let this beating go unpunished." Shanmo stopped moving. There was no expression on his face, and his eyes stared at me for a long time with a complex gaze. Slowly, I realized what was going on, and fell silent too. "It's no use, is it?" Shanmo nodded, and then we both fell silent. The quiet path in the middle of the flower bed was filled only with the sound of birds chirping. I cautiously watched his expression as he looked tense. He seemed uncomfortable, and I couldn't bring myself to blame him too much. It's all my fault, Shanmao. I've dragged you into this. I shook his arm and mumbled, unable to look at his expression. This had nothing to do with him in the first place. Dragged? Shanmao's cold laughter came unexpectedly. In my memory, he was always gentle, never sharp like this. I looked up in confusion to see the sarcasm in the corners of his eyes, as if he had heard something funny. I was at a loss. His lips were pale, but his words became more urgent, as if he wanted to vent all the resentment and suppression in his heart. His handsome brows were furrowed tightly, and I realized he was in pain, regretting his words. For the rest of the way, he remained silent. The trembling eyelashes and pained expression from earlier seemed to linger before my eyes, and all the love and hatred churned in my heart, making me unable to hold back my tears. He had warmed me like a bowl of bean curd in winter, but he was lonely, only able to embrace himself in the passage of time. Even I, the main culprit, couldn't bring myself to blame him too much. On this autumn night, the umbrella couldn't shield me from the pouring rain, and the hem of my coat quickly became heavy. Sneezing, I left in a sorry state. The next day when I woke up, my head felt like it was filled with lead. I had indeed caught a cold. In the evening, there was a sudden knock on the door. Opening it, Mengyan stood there wearing a mask, blocking half of the corridor's light. Seeing it was him made my mood even worse, but I didn't have the energy to argue with him now, so I just frowned and tried to hurry him along. Mengyan didn't say much, just forcefully handed me a bucket of something. I quickly pushed it away, saying, "No, I don't want your stuff." His voice sounded nasal. "It's fish soup I made. It's good for your health. Autumn has arrived in Nanjing recently. You might not be used to it when you come back." It was a bit coincidental, and I scrutinized him suspiciously, causing him to tighten his mask discontentedly. "Don't worry, there's no poison inside. If I hadn't caught a cold myself, I wouldn't have thought of making soup for you." My attitude softened, but I couldn't help but be sarcastic. "Weren't you agile when climbing over fences a few days ago? Aren't you the pampered young master?" Mengyan became a little irritated. "I've been working for a few days, and my immunity is low. Take it, I can't carry it anymore." I turned away, not wanting to take his stuff. "I don't eat fish." "Mengyan, if you're not feeling well, just rest. You don't need to do these things for me." His hand froze in mid-air, and after a while, he muttered discontentedly, "How could it be? Didn't you argue with the fishmonger for buying fish a few days ago?" My mind buzzed suddenly. "Are you investigating me, or are you following me?" His eyes narrowed suddenly, staring at me malevolently as he said word by word, "I'm not that twisted or bored. Don't doubt a policeman's professional ethics." "You, a policeman? What a joke. Could someone who bullied his classmates like this become a policeman?" I sneered a few times, successfully angering Mengyan. He briskly put down the thermos and left. The dim corridor echoed with his heavy footsteps, the motion sensor lights flickering on and off. I watched his cold back disappear around the corner. Only then did I notice the bruises he couldn't hide under his eyes. I had gone too far with what I said, but I couldn't forgive Mengyan for everything he had done, even if he had changed for the better now. Besides, I really hated eating fish. During the winter break of my sophomore year, the vegetable market was about to relocate. Meanwhile, Lao Su's health was deteriorating. Since then, it became my turn to buy fish for her. She and I were polar opposites. One abhorred fish, while the other couldn't go a meal without it. Before, I couldn't stand the smell of fish, but after she fell ill, I often went to the Shan family stall at the market to buy a block of tofu and then a fish to learn how to stew soup. After the awkwardness with Shanmao, this also became one of the few times we would see each other. On winter mornings, the tofu stall emitted a white mist amidst the noisy crowd. Shanmao's face appeared particularly serene amidst the hot air as he stood behind the old cart, greeting customers with his father, skillfully handling money from the plastic bag until our eyes met. We fell into a silent tug of war, but it didn't stop me from missing Shanmao. Just like now, in my sickness, I finally opened that bucket of fish soup. Sometimes actions are just superficial, unable to explain the turmoil in a woman's heart. Mengyuan's soup was creamy white, and even though I despised eating fish, I had to admit he had put effort into it. Stirring it with a spoon, the peppercorns in the soup base carried a dominant spiciness straight to my nostrils, much like Mengyuan himself, always assertive in everything he did. Now, I couldn't tell if I hated him myself or if it was on behalf of Shan Mo, even though 10 years had passed since he diverged from my life. I didn't know if coming back was right or wrong. Perhaps he didn't want to see me either. That winter, when I got into a dispute with the fishmonger, Shan Mo stood silently in the crowd. I remember how disheveled I was that day. Most of the time, I was too well protected by Lao Su, so the fishmonger wasn't afraid of me at all. He even smoked a cigarette leisurely while chopping fish, completely ignoring me. Silver fish scales flew everywhere, making the ground slippery, and the onlookers stood outside the circle, casting curious glances. The fishmonger's child sat inside. No one stood up for me. After all, I was outnumbered, with no adult backing me up. All I could do was hold the dripping red plastic bag stubbornly in front of the stall. Whenever someone inquired about the fish price, I would raise my voice. He just cheated me out of my weight and won't refund me. And so, minutes passed without the fishmonger making any sales. Finally, he got angry, slapped the dead fish with its gills removed aside, grabbed a cleaver, and walked out from behind the stall. He was tall, a middle-aged man with a numb and tired expression, wearing heavy rain boots. Beneath the black rubber apron was only a long-sleeved shirt, with the sleeves rolled halfway up, and the smell of fish was overpowering. "Damn little girl, ruining my business, huh?" He cursed, brandishing the cleaver in front of me, his words full of malice, and his eyes fierce, causing his flesh to tremble with his movements. The fish scales on the cleaver flew, sticking to my face, making me nauseous. My hands were so cold that I could hardly move, and I trembled with anger. "You cheated me, why shouldn't you refund me?" As more and more people gathered to watch, he began to shout loudly, his words full of malice and deliberately vulgar, saying vile things about me having no mother to teach me. The crowd nearby actually burst into laughter. In an instant, I felt sick to my stomach, as if I had swallowed a fly, my teeth chattering fiercely, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. You. My grandmother is a teacher." But these words didn't faze the fishmonger. "What teacher? Bullshit teacher." The laughter grew louder, and for a moment, I felt like I was in hell. Was this Nan City, the place I had grown up in? Those smiling faces seemed familiar, yet extremely strange. I couldn't imagine how Shanmo faced these people at the vegetable market all day long. It was at that moment that I suddenly felt a gaze behind me. Turning around, Shanmo stood silently in the crowd, looking at me expressionlessly, his eyes restrained without a trace of emotion. Suddenly, tears uncontrollably streamed down my face. I didn't know how long he had been watching, but I felt a chill run down my spine, embarrassment and shame almost shattering my sanity. At that moment, Shanmo's voice in the crowd sounded so clear and resolute. "Uncle Huang, the person you're scolding is indeed Nanzhao's teacher. Is it true that Hao is learning these things at school?" These words were spoken calmly yet dripping with venom, echoing Shanmo's anger from that day, infuriating the fishmonger to the point of wanting to fight. But he didn't stop. "You're cursing and using foul language in front of Hao today, and you even want to hit someone. Is this how you're teaching him, or are you intending to raise a child like this?" The man's expression became even uglier, but then Shanmo suddenly sighed, his tone no longer sharp. "Everyone is having a hard time. The vegetable market is about to relocate, and the stall fees will increase a lot in the future. I know you, Uncle Huang, are under a lot of pressure, but you work hard every day to sell fish just for Hao. Let it go." When these words were spoken, the surroundings fell silent. I don't remember the fishmonger's expression at that time, but I saw him throw the cleaver back onto the cutting board and lower his head, returning to the stall without a word. Then, the child was grabbed by the ear and yelled at, "You listen to me, study hard, don't be as useless as your father." There was a hint of emotion mixed in that faint, fierce tone, but at that moment, I only felt triumphant and a little happy to have gotten a fish for free. Shan Mo handed me the money from the fishmonger. His voice faded. "Let's go, Sudi." I followed hesitantly, tears still hanging on my face. When we came out of the vegetable market, it was the road, and we walked silently for a long time before the awkward feeling slowly faded away. "Shan Mo, thank you." I blushed and stuttered, unconsciously tugging at his sleeve. He turned his head, his long black eyes showing no emotion. I stared at his profile nervously for a long time before continuing. "Can you stop being mad at me? You've been ignoring me, and I'm really scared." Shan Mo sighed and stopped, his face softening again, as if he thought I had said something silly. "If I'm mad at you, why would I help you?" "I don't know, I'm just afraid you'll ignore me, even if you hate me." He smiled and handed me the handkerchief again, looking at the tears welling up in my eyes with helplessness. "Okay, I'm smiling now. Are you satisfied? Wipe your tears, miss." His voice brushed gently past my ear, and I felt a tingling sensation, unable to help but punch him. The lingering embarrassment in my heart was replaced by something else. "What?" He stood with his hands in his pockets, lips curling slightly, smiling eyes falling on me. My face slowly turned red. It was strange. I suddenly dared not look into his eyes, picked up the plastic bag, and ran away without looking back. In the distance, faint sirens seemed to sound, as if someone had reported to the police. Man Yuan didn't bother me again, and while my ears were peaceful, my heart was still filled with guilt. 2 days later, he came to my door, which was akin to inviting humiliation, but he acted as if nothing had happened. It seems that the young master had indeed changed his ways. "Sudi, do you have time to accompany me for a walk in the back mountain of Yizhang High School? I want to talk to you." His eyes looked sincere and bright, and overcome with guilt, I found myself agreeing to him in a moment of weakness. Man Yuan was very happy, chatting with me all the way about the changes in Yizhang High School. That night, I was so absent-minded that I didn't pay attention to what he was saying. When we arrived at the gate, the gatekeeper seemed to be very familiar with Man Yuan, even teasing us a bit. "If I had known this girl was your girlfriend, I would have let her in directly the other day." Man Yuan's ears turned red in an instant, and he hastily explained, stuttering, No, we're just friends, don't misunderstand," he said as he nervously glanced at my expression, afraid that I would be unhappy. After years of work, such misunderstandings were not uncommon. I just smiled lightly and went to the back mountain with him. The stone path here was smooth, perfect for a leisurely stroll and chat. The scent of pine on both sides was refreshing, and smelling the post-rain air, my mood relaxed. Until we reached the place where I used to walk with Shan Mo, I couldn't help but drift off. "Sudi, Sudi?" Man Yuan called my name twice, but I didn't respond. Even a fool could see that I was indifferent to him. His face finally darkened. "Sudi, do you really need to be so?" He seemed unable to continue, just looked at me deeply with a hint of resentment. I, however, had already raised all my defenses, instinctively wary of his every word. But the crevices of the stone path were all covered in slippery moss, and with the rain, it was easy to slip. When I realized it, I was already falling down uncontrollably. Before I could scream, Man Yuan had caught me steadily, my face colliding with his firm chest. Perhaps my actions were too cold and heartless, as he seemed a bit hurt. "Do you really disdain me like this, Sudi?" I remained silent. His eyes flashed with a hint of moisture, his brows pressing down with sadness. "I feel like you've misunderstood me too deeply, Sudi. I pursued you for 3 years in high school, and you never showed me a good face. Yes, my friends made it difficult for Shan Mo, but I never did anything behind your back. I just hope you can look at me with a straight face once." Man Yuan's voice carried a hint of nasal tone, making his tone somewhat pitiful. As soon as he mentioned Shan Mo, I exploded. Shanmao was a scar in my heart that I couldn't bear. How dare he? Do you dare to mention those people bullying Shanmao? You have no idea? Some things don't need you, Meng Dashao, to dirty your hands. There are naturally people to help you do it. Even if you have turned over a new leaf now, ask yourself, are you really guilt-free? My words seemed to shake Menyuan's body, and I watched as the light in his eyes slowly extinguished. My words were a bit too harsh, but I just wanted to dispel his delusions. She walked briskly ahead of me, heading down the mountain road. We didn't speak anymore, as if the brief happiness from before had never existed. Finally, he asked, "So, why did you come back this time?" My heart trembled, my lips trembling uncontrollably. "It has nothing to do with you." He seemed to understand suddenly, his expression turning cold, and after a moment, it turned into a kind of sadness that I couldn't understand. "So, is it really because of Shanmao?" I gritted my teeth and shouted, "Leave! I don't want to see you. Please don't interfere in my affairs in the future." He looked at me, his Adam's apple moving hard, but in the end, he just gave a bitter smile and walked down the mountain alone under my gaze. And my heart still ached, because this place was also the closest place to happiness for me in the past. On the afternoon before the college entrance examination, Shanmao and I almost had a similar scene. We were like this, one after the other, but unlike now, it was me talking to Shanmao. Even so, I felt so sweet. The summer rain almost washed the entire back mountain, and there were few people here. It was a good opportunity for me to speak. "Shanmao, which university do you want to go to? How about we go to the provincial capital?" His voice came muffled from behind. Then you can study computer science, and I want to study Chinese." What do you think about us both taking the entrance exam for Jinling University? It's in the same school." Then let's work hard together, and we'll definitely meet at the appointed time." From start to finish, he only responded so lightly. I was a bit unhappy and turned my head to complain, but my feet slipped. Thankfully, Shanmao immediately caught my hand. After the shock subsided, it took a long time for my heart to return to normal. I wanted to pull my hand away, but Shanmao didn't let go. I looked at him strangely. His expression was very ordinary, as if holding hands was such a natural thing for us. The quiet mountain path seemed to only have the sound of our breathing and my restless heartbeat. I turned my head, no longer looking at him, but my fingers remained clasped in his palm, never letting go. At this moment, besides feeling shy, surprisingly, what I was most worried about was whether my hands were too sweaty. But Shanmao seemed completely unaware, his slender and warm hand tightly holding mine, as if afraid that I would slip away. We walked like this for a long time, the tenderness almost freezing time, until the mountain path was almost at its end. I finally couldn't help but foolishly look at him. "Shanmao, do you hate me?" His eyes stared at me without blinking, a gentleness I had never seen before. His black pupils like whirlpools, almost drowning me. "I don't hate you." Finally, not just like small stones, those 3 words were thrown into the lake of my heart, creating ripples that still lingered from years ago. I touched my chest, closed my eyes, and it seemed like I could go back to the past. Amidst the cold rain, the scent of osmanthus swayed. It was time to go see him. I made up my mind. 6K&D Lane. That was the old residence of the Shen family. I wasn't sure if they had moved away. In fact, after many years, the road leading there had changed so much that I couldn't recognize it anymore. The corner grocery store had been replaced by a Baizhou, and the sculpture at the crossroads where I had come had been moved to the newly built civic square. Those desolate empty spaces had all been filled with buildings. After asking many people, I finally found the almost deserted K&G Lane. In the city planning of Nancity, it was hard to tell which ring road it was now. Turning around the corner, the dilapidated wall had collapsed halfway. The low and dilapidated houses, uninhabited, had lost their vitality, and even the door frames had warped due to the rain. The spring couplets from previous years were as pale as elegiac couplets, with faded characters. The low-lying muddy ground was full of puddles, and the small stones on the road were nowhere to be seen. KNG Lane was quiet, like something out of a ghost story. But I wasn't afraid. I saw the mark I had made on the wall years ago with a water-based pen. The two characters Shanmao were written very small, and it took me a long time to find them. Behind them was a foolish heart, followed by my name Sudi. At the end, there was a question mark. I couldn't discern what mood I had written them in back then, and I could barely make out the question mark. Not long after the college entrance examination, Lao Su passed away. The coming and going of guests, the noisy laughter and sorrow, and the solemn crematorium, these moments became brief snapshots in my memory. Lao Su left some money, clearly intended for me to go to college. But the house belonged to the children of Lao Su and her ex-husband, so I had no reason to stay after going to college. After more than a month, when I finally came to my senses, I realized that Shanmo hadn't attended Lao Su's funeral. The market had moved, and I went to the new address, but I didn't find the old fan there. Finally, I saw it on the roadside, next to the familiar meat stall owner. Strangely, Shanmo was busy by himself, collecting money and greeting customers. Shan's parents were not there. Shan's mother was in poor health, so maybe they had gone to the hospital. I watched for a long time, but in the end, I didn't go up. I was a bit angry, but I didn't want to cause trouble. In a few days, I would have to report, and Shanmo was busy again. We could just meet at school then. There was only one train from Nansili to the provincial capital every day, and you could always see him on the reporting day. The K34 train departed on time, but Shanmo was nowhere to be seen on the platform or on the train, until the train left, and I reluctantly gave up. Later, during the reporting days, I waited on the platform every day, but I never saw him until the deadline. He didn't come to report with the new students that year. Every restless night, I asked myself the same question. Why? Why did Shanmo lie to me? That year during Mid-Autumn Festival, I had no family to reunite with, but I still came back. In the twilight, I waited at the entrance of KNG Lane for Shanmo for a long time, but he never showed up. I had a water-based pen in my bag. Bored, I squatted at the corner of the wall and scribbled childish graffiti. Shanmo loves Sudi. Shanmo, did you ever like me a little bit? I need your answer. Shanmo didn't come home until dusk had fallen. The air at the entrance of the lane was filled with the smell of cooking smoke and damp moss. My feet had gone numb from squatting for so long, and it wasn't until I heard the rumbling of wheels that I stood up suddenly. After not eating for a day, low blood sugar made me so dizzy that I could hardly see the person coming. But it was Shanmo, and I just knew it. Seeing my pale face, he was almost startled. The car in his hand fell with a clatter, and I heard his footsteps hurry to me. My vision darkened, and I could only grope to touch his hand. Shanmo. His hand was so cold, almost devoid of any warmth. I shivered, and he immediately withdrew his hand. I have low blood sugar. It took me a long time to squeeze out this sentence. He hesitated for a moment, then took a plastic bag and a spoon, scooping something from the big bucket and handing it to me. I immediately uncouthly gulped down the contents of the bag. The smooth and tender texture of the bean curd and the sweet osmanthus flavor slid over my taste buds, giving me strength in my limbs. Shanmo, thank you. He smiled dumbly, watching me gobble up the food. After a while, I complained, Shanmo, why didn't you go to report? I waited for you for a long time. He didn't say anything, just kept tidying up. I was a little angry at his absent-mindedness and felt sour in my heart. Why didn't you come to Lao Su's funeral? I've been waiting for you. His hand paused, seeming a bit at a loss. Unable to get an answer, I grabbed his busy hands tightly, only to find that they had become so rough. He withdrew his hands again, and I felt like I had been doused with cold water. Tears that had been accumulating for days suddenly burst out. Why weren't you there? Why did you go back on your word? Why didn't you answer me? You promised me that we would go to the provincial capital together. go to Jin University together. I looked for you on the train for a long time, and then I went to the platform every day to wait for you. Why did you lie to me?" In a blur of tears, I almost collapsed into his arms, grabbing onto his clothes and crying out, "I only have you left. Why don't you want me anymore? Why even you lied to me? We promised to be together forever." I must have gone crazy. My voice was hoarse from crying. At that moment, my cheeks suddenly felt hot. It was Shanmo crying. His tear-filled eyes pierced through my heart, and I couldn't help but reach out to wipe away the large tears on his cheeks. Before I could react, my hand was pressed against the wall by him. His slender body pressed tightly against mine, and his warm breath approached me. I suddenly realized that Shan Mao was no longer a boy. In the time we hadn't seen each other, he had matured, his face gaining some youthful handsomeness, with sharper and more defined features. He leaned in closer to me, his strong heartbeat overwhelming my senses. My gaze became panicked, but he restrained my chin, not allowing me to escape. In that moment, I felt how dominant and intense he truly was. As his cheek pressed against mine, our noses intertwined, and I could almost feel the texture of his lips against mine amid the scorching breaths. My heart raced uncontrollably, unable to hide my desire any longer. Could it be that my long-standing feelings were finally being reciprocated? Just then, a weak voice called out from the alley, "Shan Mao, is that you?" All rationality suddenly returned, and the ambiguous atmosphere vanished. I only then noticed the misty drizzle falling upon us, the desolate autumn wind enveloping us with its chill. Shan Mao's lips froze, and he buried his head deeply in my shoulder, his restrained strength sinking into my heart. It lasted only a moment before he coldly released me. For some reason, I panicked, feeling as though his heart, which had briefly thawed, had frozen over once again. I reached out, almost despairingly, to catch up to him. The chaotic scene in front of Shan's house was in disarray. Streaks of white gauze hung from the eaves, soaked nearly transparent in the night rain. "Shan Mao, you promised me." My shout received only his indifferent response. "Sudi, I've had enough. I'm too tired. Please don't come looking for me again. And I don't like you either." The sound of rain filled the air as I stood there, stunned, thinking I must have misheard. Standing motionless in the cold rain for a moment, I suddenly understood the meaning behind his response. That day, my question was, "Shan Mao, do you hate me?" His answer was, he didn't hate me, but he also didn't like me. The bond between us was half my own wishful thinking and half his tolerance. So the question on the wall also had an answer. How wonderful! After standing in the alley for a while, I slowly came to my senses and walked to the door of the cottage. There was only a stone mill in front of the door. The bamboo weaving tools and the white gauze used for tofu making were nowhere to be seen. The asmethyst tree from years past still stood, its golden flowers unpicked, their cold fragrance sinking into the water and embracing the damp mud. There seemed to be faint murmurs coming from inside the house, and my body suddenly froze, a sense of dread creeping over me for no apparent reason. This was the end of my search for Shan Mao, and I was no longer the girl I used to be. I should knock on the door courageously and without hesitation. Even if Shan Mao was married with children now, I wouldn't feel sad. It had been many years since everything happened. Instead of worrying about whether Shan Mao liked me, I should wish him well. This was already a wish fulfilled. With determination, I knocked on the door. After a moment, the sound of faint footsteps approached the door, and sweat formed on my back unexpectedly. The door creaked open, and an elderly woman hunched over walked out, squinting and looking around. Her eyesight wasn't very good, swollen and blurry, with murky tears hanging from her eyes. After a while, her withered hands suddenly grabbed onto me excitedly, and tears of excitement welled up in the corners of her eyes. "Susu? Susu. It's Susu. Auntie?" I stared at that aged face for a long time before cautiously speaking, hardly able to believe it. How did Shan Mao's mother become so ill? Suddenly, another set of footsteps came from the dimly lit interior, and my heart almost leaped to my throat. Was it Shanmao? A familiar man gave me a heavy smile, seeming surprised that it was me. Sudi. In an instant, the sound of rain on the umbrella became overwhelming, drowning out my heartbeat, almost extinguishing all the noise in the world. Meng Yuan, why is it you? He nodded gently, his police uniform shining brightly in the dim light, and his chin seemed to have sprouted a lot of stubble overnight, making him look extremely tired. I've let you down. My heart was filled with endless pain and sorrow, almost suffocating me. Yet, I managed to compose myself and took a seat. The cottage was small, with only 3 rooms, but it was now equipped with various modern appliances and furniture, indicating that Auntie's living conditions had been taken care of in recent years. Auntie held my hand tightly, unwilling to let go, her emotions running high. After much persuasion from Meng Yuan, she finally went inside to rest. For some reason, a sense of unease began to creep into my heart. Then, Meng Yuan sighed and said, "What do you want to ask? Go ahead." I saw deep exhaustion in his eyes, and suddenly, tears started to flow uncontrollably down my cheeks. With trembling voice, I asked, "What about Shanmao?" "He's passed away," Meng Yuan said, his voice heavy with exhaustion. The weight of those words seemed to drain him completely, leaving him slumped in the chair behind him. It took me a while to gather the strength to speak again. "How did he die?" Meng Yuan couldn't bring himself to continue. He put on his sunglasses, his hands trembling violently, tears streaming down his cheeks like a river. "Shanmao is dead. He was killed by a kitchen knife. After the vegetable market relocated, the new stall rent was twice as much as before. Unable to afford it, he and Uncle Li, the pork stall owner, occupied a good spot on the roadside of the new vegetable market. Everyone wanted the prime location, including the newcomers from the Three Gorges who also dealt in pork. They had several conflicts with Uncle Li. In such a small town, with only so many people buying pork each day, Uncle Li occupied such a prime spot without paying, naturally causing resentment. But on that day, both sides were too impulsive. Shanmao went to mediate, but the Three Gorges immigrant had already picked up a kitchen knife. After just a few strikes, the young man collapsed. Amidst the aroma of tofu pudding, Shanmao gradually lost his breath. The old handkerchief in his chest pocket fell before him. He managed to grasp it, but his lips were too cold to make a sound. His eyes gradually lost focus, drifting away from the crowded street and towards the rainy sky. Somewhere, osmanthus blossoms bloomed, their cool fragrance sealing everything. He seemed to return to the alley outside his home, watching his past self wipe away that question mark. Minutes later, police sirens shattered the morning Shanmao of Nan City. The rain-soaked pavement was stained red with blood, coins scattered everywhere. Within the police cordon, the spilled tofu pudding lay in ruins, the pristine white substance trampled by the belated arrival of the police. The emergency call made 10 minutes earlier went unanswered. The officers on duty had gone to buy breakfast. The police station was only a minute or two away from the scene. Later, the Three Gorges immigrant was sentenced to life in prison. But what was the use? His family was also destitute. People say it's fate. Within a year, 2 successive disasters completely destroyed this warm yet poor family. Fate is cruel. What good does it bring to good people? Shanmao's father was such a kind and honest man. The unfortunate stall owner selling 2 yuan goods hit him with his 3-wheeled cart, and he even helped pick up the mirror and comb that fell onto the road for the other person. Feeling guilty, the stall owner wanted him to go to the hospital, but he didn't want to burden others if he was fine. By nightfall, he couldn't make it. He entered the hospital at around 5 or 6, and by past 8, he was gone. His subcutaneous tissue was covered in purple bruises, his organs ruptured and bleeding. It was too late for treatment. There was no hope. Shanmao had to take over his father's responsibilities, giving up on going to college and staying in Nan City to take care of his mother. But his promising life ended just a few months after his father's death. Good things in the world are fragile. and colored clouds are easily dispersed like fragile glass. It has always been this way. When I woke up again, it was already the next day. Shanmo's death shattered me. For several days, I couldn't even climb. Until that morning, I was awakened by the clatter of the heavy millstone outside, as Auntie Shen turned it, thick white slurry dripping from its narrow mouth. Smoke rose from the old chimney, and soon the soy milk boiled, emitting a fragrant aroma. The tofu pudding, tender and smooth, was brought to my bedside. Susu, wake up! Try it and see if Auntie's cooking has deteriorated. Her gaze was eager, almost piercing, following my expressions closely. I forced down the bitterness in my throat and smiled as I replied, "It's the same, just like Shanmo used to make." Her eyes turned red again as she stared fixedly at the tofu pudding in my bowl for a while before suddenly getting up and leaving the room. After a rustling sound, she placed something in front of me. "This is?" My puzzled look was too obvious, and she wiped away the tears that had welled up in her eyes, explaining with a smile, "That year, you and Shanmo were at my house picking Osmanthus flowers. Shanmo made a jar of Osmanthus gem himself and didn't let us touch it. Now that he's gone, I've been keeping it safe." As she spoke, her voice gradually became choked with tears, as if she wanted to vomit blood. "Susu, my dear, it's all my fault. I've ruined you. Ruined Shanmo." My hands clenched the bedding tightly, my chest so tight that my breath stopped, tears in my eyes swirling but never falling. I couldn't understand what she meant. The old blue handkerchief was neatly folded again, caressed lovingly by her, and finally placed in my palm. That boy Shanmo, he held onto this handkerchief until the end. I stared fixedly at her lips as they moved, but the words seemed to come in fragments that I couldn't grasp. I regret it. If I had known he would end up like his father, I wouldn't have kept him. It's my fault, I've burdened him. Susu, don't blame me. Don't blame us for not going to Teacher Su's funeral. Don't blame me for not letting Shanmo go to see you. His father died at the wrong time. The family had no money, couldn't burden you anymore, so I persuaded him all night. Susu, if you must hate someone, hate me. Families like ours can only resign ourselves. We can't drag you down anymore." Her hand gripped mine tightly, cold and rough, as if her heart had died long ago that morning. I shook my head numbly, everything around me muted, but Shanmo's words from years ago echoed in my mind. How ironic! Suddenly, I understood why Shanmo had exploded back then. He had struggled all his life, refusing to resign himself. But he was just a fragile little boat in a storm. Everyone said he was a burden, but advised him to give up. He could only fight desperately against the waves. Who could understand the taste of being isolated and helpless? That afternoon, when he promised me, he had hoped so much for our future, hoping to change everything. Until the night his father died, he must have burned away all hope in his mother's persuasion. Before the kitchen knife struck, my Shanmo had already died. Looking at the jar in front of me, I trembled as I grabbed a spoon and scooped out a full spoonful into the bowl, then mechanically swallowed it in large gulps. Eating too hastily, I coughed violently several times, but I didn't stop. Until finally, those bits of tofu pudding that couldn't go down surged out of my stomach. "Sudi, Sudi!" The tall man in front of me anxiously slapped my face, trying to bring me back to consciousness. It was Meng Yuan. My cheeks felt numb, then cold and wet again. I came to my senses, feeling the tears on my face. Meng Yuan was very worried about me. From the beginning, he was afraid that I had come back for Shanmo, but fate was such that all his efforts were in vain. Now, the other shoe had finally dropped, and I no longer had to search for Shanmo in the vast sea of people. I found the answer. He lies in the cemetery of Nan City, buried beside his father. From now on, I have one more person to mourn. Offering a bouquet of flowers, along with my youthful affection, I am going to catch that departing K34 train, fulfilling the old promise from 10 years ago. Meng Yuan followed closely behind, a bit worried about my mental state, chattering incessantly along the way. At the front of the train station, As we parted ways, I couldn't help but ask him, "Are you always so kind, Officer Meng?" He forced a smile, waved to me, and the taillights of the black Buick disappeared at the intersection. "Goodbye, Meng Yuan. I think Shanmo no longer blames you." The side story of Meng Yuan. On the way back driving, I saw someone selling tofu pudding on the street, so I got out and bought a bowl. The taste couldn't compare to the Shen family tofu pudding I bought in the old vegetable market that winter, but I finished it nonetheless. Lately, I've been smoking heavily, and today, after seeing off Sudi, I coughed up blood. In that moment, I felt a strange sense of relief. Trapped in guilt for a whole decade, I'm exhausted. After working overtime for several days, I felt a bit dizzy on the highway. As the steering wheel slipped from my hands, I saw that person's face on the windshield of the car in front of me. Is Shanmo coming for my life? At that moment, I wasn't actually afraid. But I never expected to see Sudi again, the girl who illuminated my life like a flame, stubborn, wild, and proud. She was like a wild horse, disrupting my entire youth. If it weren't for her, Shanmo would just be a tragic protagonist, and I wouldn't even shed a tear for him. But since meeting Sudi, my life intertwined with Shanmo's in a certain sense, relentlessly. I never liked Shanmo. My dislike was too obvious. I just stood by and others punished him for me. I suppressed the guilt in my heart. Guilt is weakness, and I don't like that. Later, karma came. After a vicious murder on the street, my dad was demoted, and my mom's business ran into trouble again. Overnight, from heaven to hell, my mind cleared, realizing how foolish I used to be. And what's even more ridiculous is that the victim of that vicious incident was Shanmo. The phone wasn't answered that day because the operator on duty was absent, gone to buy breakfast for my dad, missing the best opportunity to respond to the call. The town's security had always been good. That operator probably didn't expect such a tragic event to happen on such an ordinary day. I can't help but feel guilty. I want to atone. Taking care of Mrs. Shen is one of the small things I can do. After repeating a year, I got into the police academy, hoping to turn over a new leaf. But every day I live is so heavy. I can't walk under the sun with a clear conscience. Can't let myself be a little comfortable. However, I don't want Sudi to hate me. Originally, this was my last hope in the world, but she shattered all my illusions. I'm sorry, Shanmo. Autumn in Nan City is such a heavy mistake.